When LLVM asked me to do a workshop on inclusion, I was worried. I know that often equality and inclusion can come across as a fluffy subject. I don't do fluff. I work with engineers at leadership and executive management levels to help them get resources for their departments and get more influence in the business. I don't do fluff. I worked in equality and diversity for 9 years. I know how fluffy this stuff can get. So I was focused on the actions. What are the problems, the way the newbies and the experienced LLVM members see them as they are right now, and what can we do about it? That was my bottom line. So I decided to look at about 450 registration entries to find out what people thought. When I looked at these registrations, there were 3 core themes that were emerging. One of them was the fact that it was a bit of a cultural challenge, that sometimes people didn't receive feedback in the kind of depth and detail that they wanted, and they felt really concerned about asking details about what that meant or clarification. The other one was that people worried about coming across as an idiot or speaking up. And the other was that they couldn't find where to start. They couldn't find tutorials. They couldn't find information. It was overwhelming, the amount of channels they could use to communicate with the community. Now, one thing that worried me more than anything was the fact that in the registrations, only one person had said that they would want to attend my workshop on inclusion. I started having nightmares that Tanya and I, and perhaps Cindy, if we were lucky, would be on a workshop on dead air, alone, with virtual tumbleweeds going past in the ether, wondering what on earth to do. My fears were, however, allayed when I got a message on LinkedIn from a veteran LLVM member who said how excited he was about this workshop and how delighted he was that we're doing this, and how he believes that any community that's strong is also strong because they welcome newcomers. So I thought, we'll probably be lucky to get about 20, maybe 50 people on the call. I was completely blown away when we got about 170 people. And I couldn't believe the amount of newbies who'd come to the table, because that's what we wanted. We wanted to hear from people we hadn't heard from before. And it was fantastic to see that they trusted us enough to open and tell us what they really thought. One of the core problems that came up over and over again was this presumption that, an assumption from newbies in particular, that veterans, experienced experts from LLVM were perfect. They wouldn't welcome feedback on their own work, and that they would be annoyed or dragged down by newbies. I think these kind of fears were allayed pretty quickly by some of the experienced members coming forward and saying how they enjoy working with newbies, and newbies expressed a keen interest to receive mentorship from them. One of the other core things that came up in the discussion was that the code review process is designed to focus on the problems. And that's fine to an extent, but both the person who wrote the code as well as the person reviewing need to know the good stuff as well. What's good, what resonated, is the stuff I'm working on resonating with you? Focusing just on what doesn't work gives the impression that all of your work is rubbish, when actually perhaps only 2% of the work might need a bit of improvement, but 98% of it is awesome. And not talking about the 98% can make people feel demotivated. The other thing was that experienced people definitely didn't feel dragged down by newcomers. And some of them even felt themselves the same sort of feelings of worry about asking questions. And some even had people telling them that what they contributed wasn't valuable in the past. And newbies were very interested to hear how these experienced LLVM members overcame those sorts of challenges. And is that really acceptable to say something like that to people? The other common challenges that emerged were the fact that newbies and anyone really were worried about asking dumb questions, because the system at the moment records those questions and a potential employer could find and search those answers out and see that they had perhaps questions about LLVM in the past that could come across as them not knowing enough about this kind of work. The other thing was they were worried about asking dumb questions and coming across to the community as not someone who's valuable or knows what they're doing. And the newcomers were not sure who to ask for what. Who is expert in what areas? And can you ask them? How can you contact them? When are they available? And these sorts of questions were barriers that stopped new people from contributing. It was very endearing to see a message written in the chat by one of the experienced veteran LLVM people who said, "It's really exciting to hear I'm new to LLVM so often in this workshop. It was indeed fantastic to get so many LLVM members who kept saying, I'm new and I'd like to ask a question. I'm new and I'd like to make a suggestion. I'm new. It was fantastic to hear so many fresh voices that probably hadn't contributed before. Now, there were a lot of fantastic suggestions of what we could do to bridge that gap between newcomers and experienced people and bring fresh blood into the organization, to the community. If we were to wait for Tanya as the only member of staff at LLVM to implement all of those suggestions, we would probably have to wait for about 20 to 40 years to really get some movement going. So with that in mind, I was thinking it'd be helpful for the LLVM community members themselves to come forward and implement some of this stuff. Yes, Tanya can implement a Screwup channel for Discord, for example, like one of the suggestions we had where people said we'd love to have experienced people describing things that they screwed up and how they fixed them. This wouldn't be a channel where anybody could name and shame someone else. You'd only be allowed to describe your own mistakes and your own fixes that you came up with. Certainly, Tanya and LLVM in general can look at creating a dashboard for requests for tutorials and what is being worked on and where are the links for those. But she can't create all the tutorials. She needs the input from the community about what tutorials are needed and who wants to make videos or respond to those tutorial requests. Also, I think Tanya can possibly look at IRC or other ways to address the permanence feature of asking dumb questions. Yes, we don't want people's names attached long-term to some of the challenges that they might pose or questions they feel are dumb. So this is something that they can look at. But there were some really good ideas about what experienced people could do to help welcome newbies, and one of them was to have office hours. In fact, one member who's been with LLVM for a while proposed that, and he said he was happy to have an hour once a week, once a month. That's a set hour every month where people can just log in and ask him questions and discuss certain parts of the project, or having also a list of who does what, who's expert at what, and how can you contact them? Do they have office hours? When are those office hours? There's a million suggestions that people made about how we can bridge the gap, especially things that experienced people can do. But one core thing for everybody would be also, when you review a code, say what you liked about it. Talk about the good 98%, not just the bad 2%. It's really important to tell people what was good as well. And the suggestions for newbies were that for them to make videos themselves once they fix a bug or figure something out, to make a video about what they learned, so then other newbies can figure this stuff out as well. I hope this gives you some ideas of the ways forward. And if you would like to get involved or want to know some of the other ideas, ask us in the Q&A, but also contact Tanya if you want to volunteer or do some parts of these actions. It's really important to have the community engaged to make this happen. Look forward to your questions. Bye.
Thank you, Adelina. That was fabulous. It was great to hear your perspective and takeaways from that fantastic workshop. And I was also really pleased to see so many people had turned out and attended. It was fantastic. Exceeded my expectations totally. As you're talking, I was, first of all, I do want to commend, there are lots of volunteers in the LLVM community that are doing a lot of great work right now. So I know Adelina is kind of poking fun a little bit about it lying all on my shoulders. But one thing that I have seen, and I'd like to get your advice on this, is that we have a lot of people with a lot of knowledge and expertise in LLVM in the community. How do they convince their employers that doing this sort of work is valuable? Because they have a day job, they have a lot of expectations. Doing that may not help them get promoted. So how can our members of the community sell this to their employers that this is an important thing?
Oh, very good question. When it comes to convincing your manager to let you do some work that might not necessarily be part of your core job, it's always about what benefit could the company ultimately have from this. Is it perhaps the network that you might be creating through your work at LLVM? Is it perhaps some fresh ideas that you could be getting from the community? When it comes to convincing your boss about letting you do certain things that you want to do, never think about it from your perspective. Think about it from your boss's perspective. What would it be in it for your boss or for the company or for the team if they let you do this? What are the pluses? Don't mention the pluses necessarily for you unless you're telling them how it enables you to be more productive at work. And having some examples of that could be also very helpful. So the core thing is, think about how would this make you perhaps a bit more productive in your job or more creative? And give some examples to your boss about that. The other thing would be, what sort of network are you able to reach through LLVM that perhaps you wouldn't be able to reach otherwise? And try and think as well more about, and ask your boss even about their priorities to see if you can show them how you being part of this community and working here could bring some added value to the aims that your team or your company is trying to achieve. Never ever just tell them why you want to do this. That can be like 10% of it. The 90% has to be about what's in it for the business to give you this time.
Fantastic advice. Makes perfect sense. We have a question from the audience. It seems you're making some recommendations for some cultural change. Cultural change seems hard. Do you have recommendations on how to achieve some cultural change in a loosely connected group?
Beautiful question. I actually vaguely mentioned this in the workshop that we had. And I was saying that culture always comes from the top. And by the top, in this kind of context, I mean the people that are most respected and seen as the leaders. And in a loosely connected community, like open source communities in general, not just LLVM, creating a culture means that everything that you do has to reflect the culture you want to have. So here's an example. I mentioned in my presentation a fantastic idea we had from a member about creating a Discord Screwup channel. Now, if LLVM wants to have the culture that nobody's shamed if they make mistakes, and people actually talk about the mistakes and the screw ups that they made openly, then there is no tension to diffuse. There's no bomb to diffuse. There's no shame in being open about the stuff that the mistakes that you made. And that also busts this myth that people create in their own minds, not necessarily because the others wanted to create this myth, that the experienced people are perfect. They never make mistakes, and new people always make mistakes and they're drag on everybody else. That's a myth that I've seen pretty much in every community, frankly, not just here. And actually to reinforce that culture, especially when you have a widespread community where, there's no line management here. Nobody can force you to do anything, coerce you into anything. It's the people who don't want to respect that culture effectively remove themselves from it because they don't want to do this. They don't feel they're associated with this culture. Perhaps they want a more aggressive culture. So doing everything you do to reflect the culture you want to have. So for example, when you do code reviews, like I mentioned in the presentation, not just picking, and at the moment, the way, for example, the code reviews are geared, it's only picking flaws and looking at the mistakes, but also not just picking on mistakes, but also looking at what was really good. Ooh, what did you find innovative and insightful that you wouldn't have done it that way yourself, but this was really cool. So having this kind of attitude to learning in everything, the videos you have with people, the fact that experienced people encourage newbies to give them feedback and take that feedback instead of defending it. Those are the sort of things that reinforce the culture without you having to do any major policing. Effectively living every person, especially the ones that are seen as authority, the ones that are seen as the leaders, the tribe leaders in certain areas of expertise. If those people lead on living that sort of culture, then the others usually follow. And the ones who don't want to follow, they just fall by the wayside and never come back. And that's not a bad thing.
Very true. Another question from the audience. Did any of the concerns expressed by new contributors stand out as a problem that might be unique to LLVM and not as common for other projects?
Now, it's a very good question, and I get this question from pretty much every company I work with, actually. Often people think that their problems are unique. One thing I would say is that comparing to other open source communities that I've seen, LLVM is one of the friendliest ones, actually. So you are ahead of the game, I would say, with that one. That doesn't mean there's nothing you can do to make things better, but it means that actually it's not a problem. It's a good thing that you are already friendlier than most open source communities. The one thing I would say is that when you are as friendly and as open as LLVM is, which is potentially something that would be a bit more specific to LLVM, but not necessarily, is that when everybody's so welcoming and friendly, if you have someone who's particularly loud, domineering and confident and almost arrogant, they can take over meetings. And there were hints of that in some of the registration responses that I read. And I would say that's the only thing to watch out for in terms of a particular LLVM thing, that the friendliness is fantastic, but also having that assertiveness to say in a meeting, if you see someone taking over the airtime a bit too much, a bit more than they should, for someone to say, thank you, Mary, or thank you, John. I really appreciate you saying your points. I'd love to hear from other people in the room or in the session. And kind of having, or going back to the aim of the meeting, it's very easy to lose track of what you're heading for. So having things like saying, the purpose of today's meeting was about reviewing X code. Can we please go back to that? Because at the moment we're moving towards this other topic that wasn't the aim of the meeting. That's one thing I would say when people are too friendly and a bit scared to challenge each other, because at LLVM we don't challenge anybody. For example, if people can take the friendly angle to an extreme, then it's important to have that friendliest and respectful assertiveness and challenge people and say, Thank you for that, but let's hear from others. Thank you for that, but let's come back to the aim. But that's the only thing I would say that I noticed from everything 450 answers I read.
Great. We have another question from the audience.
I love questions.
Yeah. So you gave a lot of options, a long list of things that we could make improvements on. What do you think should be tackled first?
Oh, what a beautiful question. I love these questions. I don't know who asked them, but they're fantastic questions. So I always like to think in a way in a priority order, right? So to my mind, the confidence that people, so to my mind, it's tackling the most impact problem first. And the most impact problem first from the ones I saw were the ones that went across all three themes. So you might have heard me mention that there was a cultural theme, a confidence element, and a knowledge/process element. Now, the recommendations that tackle all three of those at once, and I'll give you a few examples of those, in my mind would be the first ones to start off with. So, for example, the Screwup channel, where people who've done work go on and say, this is what I did, this is where I actually made mistakes, this is how I realized that was a mistake, this is how I corrected it. That's especially if people who are more confident or who are more experienced or respected or known as the expert, this kind of action by them kind of showing, look, I'm not perfect, and accepting feedback from less experienced people would show that cultural aspect of LLVM that you want to reinforce, which is that here, everybody's welcome and we like to exchange ideas in a friendly and collaborative way. But at the same time, people are learning from those mistakes. And at the same time, it bridges that gap for newbies because they have a channel to start off with where they can look at what is being discussed and how, and seeing people being open about their challenges and not being ripped to shreds by other people, but actually others going, oh, that's an interesting way of fixing it. I hadn't thought about it that way. And thank you for showing me how you noticed that mistake. So those sorts of actions, or the one where you have a list of who's who and what expertise they have and what their office hours are. That's another one that I think it's a fantastic way of busting the kind of a nebulous at the moment is people don't know where to look first. Who do you connect with? And the third thing I would say, just from my impression, all right, would be to have these when the newbies make videos of stuff that they learned. I thought that was a fantastic idea because they see a person who just joined LLVM 3 months ago, 6 months ago, already putting a video out. That would encourage other people to go, okay, if this guy or gal is doing this, I must be okay to do it as well. And I think those are some of the core things that would break that and improve things faster, I would say, and promote that culture friendliness you want.
Yeah. As you're talking about the Screwup channel, I think it was brought up as an intention to ask like questions that you might seem are stupid, but it almost goes the other way too, in that you can answer those questions, which you may not have the right answer. So it goes both sides of sort of the equation, in that you can screw up with the question and screw up with the answer, and no one cares.
Answer, yes. Yeah. And that's the thing. I think the only way to create that psychological safety to help people feel able to contribute when perhaps they would worry that they come across as not knowing what they're doing otherwise is to see other people, more experienced people, doing it first and kind of saying, oh, okay, so this is a true story. An engineer said to me once, I wanted to tell my boss I don't know how to do this, but I just pretended and waffled around because I didn't want to say I don't know. And I said, why didn't you feel able to say you don't know? And he said, well, I've never seen my boss do that. Why would I do it? And that's culture in action. If my boss doesn't do it, why would I do it? If the most experienced people at LLVM seem perfect, some of the registrations we had, they said things like, everybody in the community seems extremely knowledgeable, which makes it intimidating to interact with them. Well, if this is what people feel, then they're never going to come first. They need to see the extremely knowledgeable people being open about things first, I would say.
Yeah, that's definitely a culture in tech in general that I've experienced as well, all the way back into my college days with professors sending us down rabbit holes because they don't want to admit they don't know something.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's something that is not just unique to LLVM for sure.
Oh, no. And not unique to engineering. Doctors do it too.
Something that would be really great just to be more honest and open about. You just can't possibly know everything. It's not possible.
Absolutely not.
We have another question from the audience. It says, we got a lot of good options to improve overall environment for newbies. How will we know if an option is implemented or available now? That's a great question. So they want to know, when is it? How do I want to know you made some change, basically? Maybe that's a question for me.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I'm wondering, because obviously I don't know what's going on right now.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I think I should take that one. We've talked about it a little bit in the workshop about how to communicate what changes need to be made and if they've been done. And some ideas that floated around were, having a bug in the bug tracker to keep track of things that we'd like to have implemented, or a web page where people can submit, like tutorial options. They get submitted to more tutorial. We could see it as like pending or being worked on, sort of a dashboard, a status board, something like that. But other ways that we communicate in the project in general are, we have a Twitter feed, Facebook, we have a blog. All these things we definitely should utilize to communicate when we have started implementing some of these changes. So I can see those all as different avenues for that. Another question coming in. In some cases, there are decisions which have been made and are not supported by the entire community. What would be a way to move forward efficiently while keeping community friendliness? This definitely has come up a lot. Change is hard.
Sorry?
Change is hard.
Change is hard. I mean, actually, I would love if you know, Tanya, of any, if you can give me any more context or example of what that means when it says that people don't, because I can give a general answer, but I'm not happy with that. I don't think it'd be very helpful. So do you know, for example, Tanya, any examples? I don't need obviously names or anything like that. I just need a little case study or a little example, so I understand what it means when it says not the whole community agrees. What sort of things are we talking about here when they don't agree? Do they not agree to be on the internet anymore and they prefer to be online? Offline, everything offline, go back to 1980s. What is it that, what sort of things do people not agree on, as you were?
Yes. So here's some background for you. LLVM is, 20 years old. So some of the tools that we have used over the past 20 years have been looked at, and we've had conversations about changing them. So for example, communication tools, we have mailing lists. Now we're looking at forums and other ways to communicate. We used to have our code in SVN repository. Now we're on GitHub. That transition to GitHub was, a complicated thing because we had to have all these discussions within the community about, one, is this a good idea? And two, what is the best way to go about it and how to implement it? And so as a project, we've been reevaluating a lot of the tools that help us, our bug tracker, as I mentioned, communication, Discord versus IRC. And not everyone has the same opinion. And as an open source project, you have people coming from different backgrounds, different companies, different experience levels. And sometimes it can be really hard to have those conversations and also come to some sort of agreement about them. And so this question, I think, is alluding to, there definitely have been decisions that have been made that maybe some people are a little bit not happy about for a wide variety of, good reasons. So how can you I think they're asking, like, how can you make these big changes and decisions when maybe like a third of the community doesn't agree that it's a good idea to do it? It's definitely a challenge in an open source project.
Mm-hmm. The first thing I would say, changes. Yes, okay. The first thing I would say is that these sorts of changes are not hard just in open source communities, although in open source communities, I would imagine they are a level harder than usual. Because in every company that I've worked with that has had to implement some sort of change, there's always a group of people, 10 to 15%, sometimes more, that do not sign up to that change, and they put significant barriers in the leading up to the change, and then they leave because of the change, because they just no longer agree with it. And this feeds into what I said earlier, that sometimes, if you do all the research and do surveys with the members, and you realize that actually the good majority see the benefit of moving, the benefit of moving outweighs the benefit of staying. Because if you stay, you'll be missing some opportunities that you are not missing if you're changing to the up-to-date technology. And the bottom line is always, where do you want to go? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then surveying. So the steps that I would take in that sort of situation, how do you make changes when, while still being friendly and inclusive when some people don't want this? The bottom line is that you can't please everybody all the time, right? So the approach I would take is, how do you do it? Number one, be very clear about what you're trying to achieve. What would success look like if you actually implemented this? How is it benefiting the community? How is it actually, are you just joining a wave because it's a trendy thing, flavor of the month? Or is it something that's helping the community achieve something? And that's the one thing. Often people join waves and flavors of the month because it's cool and everybody, but actually, is it really relevant to you? And that's the first question I would ask. Is it helping you get to where you want to be? And then I would survey the members and see what they think, see the pluses and minuses they have. And then as a result of that survey, then I would have some qualitative discussions and see if the impact of moving is more positive than the downside of staying, basically, and staying where you are. So to me, it's always looking as objectively as possible. And I would say as well, do not make the decision straight away. Kind of let this be a process that you go through over several months. People need time to adjust mentally to a new situation. Saying to a community in January, we want to change to GitHub, and by middle of February, expecting to change to that, it's unrealistic. We have an emotional brain and then a logical brain on top. But the emotional brain is the one that feels safe with the familiar, even though the familiar is often worse. This is why so many people look at the past and go, oh, life was so much better. No, it wasn't. It's just, we feel safer with the past, even though the past wasn't actually as safe as the present is. So that's kind of the steps I would take. Always look at the benefit versus the downside, the risk and the cost. And by the cost, I mean the cost of the community in terms of kind of how many members would we lose? Would you leave, or would you just be unhappy for a while? And that's the other thing. Would people actually leave or just be begrudging for a while? But maybe in a year time they go, actually, I was against it at the beginning, but I can see why we're using that now.
Yeah, I bring up a lot of great points. Communication being very key, and making sure that everyone has their opinion heard and feels valued in that opinion as well.
Absolutely. And being very clear about, why are we doing this? Why are we considering this? What are the benefits that we see? What benefits and downsides do you see? And just kind of seeing what people think about that. But the one thing I would say, which I've seen very common in many, many settings, like I mentioned in my previous point, do not let the people with the loudest voice decide that this is it for everybody else. Because if there's one or two people that are against it and they're very vocal in meetings, but when you look at the stats, you realize that most people are happy with this. But just these two people are very confident and very strong in their opinions. They're very vocal in meetings. That doesn't mean they should overturn everything. And it doesn't mean you are unwelcoming and unfriendly if you say no. You always have to have some sort of boundaries. I think people often, because we like to see life in black and white, and people often exaggerate with we have to make sure everybody agrees to this. No, you have to make sure everybody's heard. The agreement side depends on the majority and on the risk cost benefit analysis. And by risk, I mean cost really by cost, I mean risk in the situation. There's a difference. Sometimes people don't get, they just think we should have to do what everybody wants. And everybody knows in a meeting beyond 7 people, you can never make any decisions. It's the truth. And I'm pretty sure there's more than 7 people in LLVM.
Just a couple more.
Just a couple more.
It looks like we don't have any more questions for the audience. I guess I have one final question for you.
Okay.
After going through this workshop with the LLVM community, where would you like to see us in a year from now?
So looking, as an objective observer from the outside, I would say the only thing first of all, is just that I think you are a very friendly open source community compared to a lot I've seen. And also, I love the fact that you're very mindful of this, and wanting to make sure that the members who've been there for 20 years don't just decide everything without taking into account potential new members. So that's fantastic. In a year's time, I would love to see some of those gaps bridged that we spoke about. So, for example, people saying, because some of the answers we had were, I was scared to ask more questions when I received feedback because I was worried that I'm going to annoy the experienced person who was giving me feedback. I would love to see having a Discord channel or whatever channel where people discuss their own screw ups, which creates this kind of feel and culture that doesn't even cross people's minds not to ask for clarification during feedback, and if I were to read the registrations again next year, the challenge wouldn't be I'm scared to ask questions. The challenge would be I asked so many questions, we ran out of time, maybe we should run this more often. So I would say, and also kind of this kind of who's who at LLVM, and some tutorials and seeds videos from newbies saying how they learn stuff. That's the sort of stuff that I think in a year's time would be lovely to see LLVM having. I think it would, would advance the community even more. But I think you've done an amazing job so far, if I'm honest. Not that means that I'm saying there's nothing else you can do, but I really think we should give credit. Like I said earlier, don't just focus on the 2% that doesn't work, but actually focus on the other side that works as well.
Yeah, of course. That definitely makes sense. We have to celebrate the things we have done, but always continue to strive to do better as well. So
Precisely.
Thank you so Yeah, thank you so much, Adelina. It's been such a pleasure to have you work with our community. And I really enjoyed the workshop yesterday, and I got many, many compliments from other people about how much they enjoyed it. So thank you so much for speaking with us today. And I hope we can have you back sometime. It'd be great.
I hope so too. You are one of my favorite people I've ever worked with, my favorite organizations I've ever worked with. I really think it's a fantastic project, and I love every single person I've met on here. So thank you for having me. Truly, truly honored.
Thank you.